Recognize the member for Fredericton West Hanwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the emerging Liberal ad scam is another Gallant broken promise. Now, let's look at the facts. On page 36 of the 2014 Liberal platform, it states very clearly, and I quote, "A Liberal government will make government more accountable by ending government-funded partisan advertising by adopting the Government Advertising Accountability Act." Now, the Premier introduced this bill just over a year ago, and what did he say at the time? I quote, "This bill will apply to any advertisement that the Government of New Brunswick proposes to pay for." These are the Premier's own words in Hansard. And what does the bill he introduced at that time have to say? Section 2.2 says, the head of the government office shall give a copy of the advertisement to the supervisor for review. So the question is simple. Did this government submit a copy of the ads to the supervisor of political financing for review?
The Honourable Premier.
The legislation was presented while we were in opposition, Mr. Speaker, because of the Alward government's misuse of taxpayers' money. They were using, Mr. Speaker, they were using the Premier himself, sitting on his desk, Mr. Speaker, telling everyone in New Brunswick that everything was okay, paid by the taxpayers of New Brunswick. So, Mr. Speaker, that is a partisan ad. We had other ads come out clearly pushing the agenda of the previous government, Mr. Speaker. So, as an opposition, we felt it was important to try to regulate the past government. Well, Mr. Speaker, when you look at our ads, it's about information. There's no picture of me, there's no video of me, Mr. Speaker. It is information to tell people what our policies are, Mr. Speaker. As we think that's very important, we think that's a very good use of taxpayers' money, and in fact, if the legislation that we presented to try to protect New Brunswickers from the Alward government would be enacted, Mr. Speaker, this ad would still pass. It would be informative. It's one that's giving information to the people of New Brunswick, and we stand by what we're doing. We stand by our policies and by the ads that we did that are information-based.
Member for Fredericton West Hanwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's always easy to regulate someone else and very difficult to regulate yourself. And now that this Premier feels the energy of absolute power coursing through his veins, it's very illuminating that he hasn't done what he said he was going to do 12 months ago. The reality is he doesn't need the Act to do it. He could go down today to the supervisor of political financing, submit those ads for review, and it would be done. And he would have if his ads are so virtuous, I'm sure the supervisor of political financing will put a nice big rubber stamp on it so he could go forward with clean conscience. So my question is, Mr. Speaker, did he submit the ads as he promised he was going to do a year ago? And if he hasn't, will he do it today and get the supervisor's input?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, the ad was introduced to protect the taxpayers' money from the Alward government. There's no need for that when it comes to our ads. It's information-based, Mr. Speaker. And I find it very odd to see the member opposite get up and talk about ads. He was very, very keen and okay with himself giving handouts, Mr. Speaker, with his face on it, talking about the Hanwell Drive, the Hanwell Road construction, Mr. Speaker. So we have no lessons to learn from the member opposite. Certainly have no lessons to learn from the opposition when it comes to making sure that our ads are nonpartisan and informative. So I'm going to take some of the time, Mr. Speaker, to go to something that I said yesterday. The opposition tries to act like the fiscal challenges that we have just come up overnight since we've been in government the last 7 months. So I promised I would do this since the member opposite, former finance minister, didn't acknowledge this yesterday. So I'm going to start reading a few quotes. Budget speech 2011-12. A few major themes have been evident. One is that the province is facing a major fiscal challenge. I have many more quotes, and I can't wait for the next question to go over them, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Fredericton West Hanwell.
And Mr. Speaker, in a short time in government, this Premier's arrogance is palpable. And I'll tell you, it's coming across. He's actually telling us that he's using up his time in question period with things that don't pertain to the question. Well, I've asked the Premier a very simple question. Did he submit his ads to the supervisor of political financing like he promised he would do last year? Did he do that? And if he didn't, will he do it today?
That's right.
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite didn't seem to understand the bill that was introduced. It was introduced to provide accountability to the previous government. Monsieur le Président, la loi aurait eu besoin d'un mécanisme pour l'imputabilité et c'est en raison qu'on aurait demandé à cet individu de faire ça. Ce n'est pas dans le mandat en ce moment, Monsieur le Président. La loi n'existe pas. Alors, la question de l'opposition a été répondue, malgré le fait qu'il n'aime pas la réponse, a été répondue. So I'm going to go and quote a few things, again, Mr. Speaker, that I think are very, very pertinent to today's questions and certainly yesterday's. the former finance minister in 2012 and 13 during his budget speech said, our revenue is not enough to pay for all of the public services in the same manner as we currently provide them. Budget speech 2013-14. There is no doubt that we are facing challenges in New Brunswick today. Budget speech 2014-15. These challenges have required us to make tough choices, and I have no doubt there are tough choices left to come. So, Mr. Speaker, for the opposition to pretend that the fiscal challenges facing our province appeared overnight, I think is not the case, Mr. Speaker. We have had these challenges for quite some time.